Okay, sorry about that.
No,
Go ahead.
You're great. You're working too. How prevalent do you think drug use is on the Texas State campus?
You know, we're a campus. I mean, we have a population of about 38,000 people, so we experience the same types of crimes, including drug crimes, drug offenses, that any other municipality, university, or any place that has 38,000 people that live there or go there. So we're not immune to drugs or crime, and we have pretty much every type of drug that you could imagine, that people would use up here.
Do you find opiates often?
We do find them. That tends to be a trend that will go through every couple of years. Drugs kind of trend with the demographic or more along the lines of a generational demographic than anything. So you'll have a generation that, every 5 or 6 years, you'll have a different group that comes up that may have been exposed to different drugs as they were growing up. About maybe 7 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, it may have even been a little bit further back, we had a real big trend of heroin use on campus, to the point where we had, more than probably a dozen overdoses, not just on campus, but around the city, and a lot of our students.
In 1 year?
Yeah, over the period of a year and a half. It was 16 months, real bad. Quite a few of those were actual deaths or overdoses. Several of those occurred here on campus. I know we had an overdose at the old, Butler Hall. I think we had one at Butler, we had one at Jackson, we had one at Bobcat Village. And then the city had quite a few, and then we had quite a few overdoses. People that just OD'd but didn't actually die. But we had quite a few deaths, and those were attributed to, it was a bad batch of heroin that was basically, that people were buying. And that was going on it was really potent. So most of the people, they weren't used to, I guess, doing something that was that potent.
Now, you would say that you're not really in a trend right now, as far
not
as
that I've heard of, but we'll always have, we may always run into heroin. The problem with heroin is it's really easy to conceal, so you don't, unless you happen to be searching someone or searching someone's residence, you're probably not going to find it. The reason we were running into so much of it is because we were having a lot of overdoses.
Right.
So we would have a lot of the issues that come along with that. And that's how we knew that there was I'm sure it's there. I'm sure people are using it. It's just we may not be having those overdoses. So being that it's easily concealed, unless we have an overdose or we find the evidence of heroin use, we really don't know if we have a problem. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
And heroin, it lends itself to, you can smoke it, you can freebase, you can inject it. So it's similar to other narcotics, methamphetamines, cocaine, stuff like that you can use in similar fashions. So you may not necessarily always know which drug you're running into as far as, then we have to field test it. But if we're just finding the paraphernalia that goes along with it, we may not necessarily classify it as relating specifically to heroin.
So are there any specific symptoms that are only apply to heroin use that you wouldn't see in meth or cocaine or anything else?
Heroin, your methamphetamines, those you're really going to have people that are really jacked up on meth. Cocaine does the same; it really jacks you up. Heroin, you're going to have people that you just find that are it's a depressant, really. So they act differently, and that's how when we find somebody like that may have the paraphernalia, those are things that we look for, between the two, what the person's. if they're wired, sweaty, pupils are way wide open, it just depends. We take a look at those and then compare them to figure out what we're necessarily dealing with. And a lot of those times, those are things that we don't really involve ourselves in so much.
Sure.
That's more along what the medics and the doctors will really take a look at once they get it, when we're dealing with an overdose. It does help us determine, it does help us in our investigation if we know, in the field what that is, but we try not to guess, and really it's not going to make a whole lot of difference to our initial investigation,
Right.
what they're on, but it will help us later on if we decide to file charges or something like that.
When that heroin outbreak was happening, you said about 7 years ago, so you think
I
about
can't,
2000?
my memory is horrible.
Okay.
I know that we had a death
And you worked here at that
during,
time?
yes, we had, what made it was, we were in the championship for the football. It was after the new stadium was already done, and I think it was after the new stadium was already done. But it was a really hot summer, and there was a guy that had died his girlfriend had moved out from Bobcat Village. He went over there, found that she'd moved out, and he was depressed, so he decided to take a shot of heroin right there by her door. And there was a bunch of trash bags from her moving out, so we sat on them, cooked it up, took a shot, and OD'd right there. And we didn't find him for like 3 or 4 days later, and it was not pretty.
What is it like coming onto a scene like that?
I wasn't actually there, but this was on the 3rd floor, and the staff at Bobcat Village was walking around, and they noticed some odor and some fluid leaking down onto the ground. So they thought that there was a bunch of trash up there, and when they initially went up, they couldn't really recognize that he was there. They smelled it because his skin, he was a white male, but his skin had turned black from exposure to the sun, just from him. So he was laying on some black trash bags, and they didn't initially see it until they noticed, and then once they looked, it was, he'd been there for a while, so there was lots of things under his skin, and it wasn't pretty.
Other than that awful scenario, what do you think some of the other consequences that could happen to people who choose to start using heroin?
Well, heroin's very addictive. It's not cheap, and it usually when people develop a habit on a drug like that, it really spirals out of control. Their grades slip. They're going to start doing things that they wouldn't ordinarily do to try to afford the drugs. There's no doubt that people turn to prostitution, turn to doing other theft, maybe even selling drugs to try to afford to, do stuff like that.
What are some of the legal things that someone can be charged with?
So if you're, of course, if you're in possession, it's a felony. If you sell it or give it to someone, then you can be charged with distribution. And I've heard of cases where they've actually pursued people who sold it to other people that have OD'd for involuntary manslaughter. I don't know if those ever went anywhere, but it's basically what you would deal with possession most of the time. We don't always file those charges depending on what the circumstances are. Of course, we're not going to file charges against someone if they OD and pass away. But then, there's all kinds of things that you can face from, as far as, sanctions from within the university also.
Have you personally, this year, found heroin on campus?
I haven't.
But in the
I would have. I don't know if other officers have. Once again, you'd have to do a records check to find out if
Absolutely.
they've made an arrest in the last 12 months for heroin. It wouldn't surprise me if they did.
I asked all my questions. Do you have anything else?
He
You were
covered
really
everything.
thorough.
He was very descriptive.
Yeah.
He helped a lot.
No, it's really a
no,
lot
that's-
of beef of our project.
That's all
right
I
there.
have. I was mainly just concerned with, specific instances like what you described in the story. So everything else.
Yeah, I mean, whenever we do an investigation that deals with an overdose, with a death, we always have to, we collect all the evidence. We always you always have to approach any death as a homicide until we know otherwise. So, it takes a toll on us because that takes a lot of resources to do an investigation like that. We have to collect a lot of evidence. We have to, basically everything that's in the environment. Specifically, I know over at Butler Hall when we had the death over there, I mean, they had to collect pretty much everything in the room that could be evidence, and then we had to sort through all that. So it's tough on us too to go through, and it's resource. I mean, it takes a lot of resources to do an investigation like that.
What were some of the circumstances for the death at Butler Hall?
It was a hot shot of heroin. Also, it was just no intent to harm them. I mean, other than, of course, using a dangerous drug, but no intent to harm themselves or commit suicide. They just got it was too hot and caused them to die.
When you say hot shot of heroin, you're literally talking about the temperature of it?
No, I'm talking about the potency of it.
Okay, what exactly does it describes hot shot of heroin?
So a hot shot would be that it's not cut enough.
Mm-hmm.
They take too much of a dosage.
Okay.
I mean, so when they cut heroin, depending on how it's cut, you don't always know what the purity of it is.
Sure.
So you can have a pure, I mean, I wouldn't guess that you would have real pure heroin around here, but you could have heroin that's 40-50% pure as opposed to heroin that may be 30% pure.
Okay.
And, that 20%, if you're taking, a decent sized rock and injecting it all at one time,
Right.
You can overdose. You don't know how your body's going to respond. You don't know,
Right.
A lot of people, they try it for the first time and they're not prepared for what's going to happen. They don't know that they have underlying medical issues that are affected by something like that, and they end up dying.
So generally a bad batch of heroin or not cut very well generally means it's too potent?
It's either too potent or they cut it with something that's extremely dangerous.
Okay.
They'll cut it with all kinds of stuff.
Do you think that there's a large correlation between people using prescription opiates and people who graduate to using
They
heroin?
can be, because the prescription opiates are extremely addictive, and then once they no longer have that resource, or their prescription runs out, then they're looking for that, that same connection, and they turn to that because that's all they have available. And the side effects for prescription, like abuse of oxycodone or stuff like that, I mean, it's the same. You start seeing the same physiological changes that your body goes through as a heroin addict, other than you're not. But see, a lot of people, they'll take an oxy pill and they'll cook it down and they'll inject that, instead of taking it. Well, it's more pure going into your body. It doesn't go through your stomach and your body doesn't break it down. So, the physiological changes that your body goes through the abuse can be similar, even for prescription opiates.
Anything else, Laura?
No,
Yeah.
that was really it.
That was
I'm glad
great.
we asked that
Yeah.
last question, because that was like half of what our project is about. And you've been incredibly helpful.
You're welcome.
So you say your name Glenna Winkle?
Yes.